The desert's secret, the Nevada desert, was a place where silence had weight. Out there, beneath the endless vault of sky, the earth was bare and scorched, painted in tones of red and gold by the unforgiving sun. Travelers on the lonely highways often remarked that the desert felt alive, as if it carried secrets too large for the human mind. Those who lingered long enough at night swore they heard whispers on the wind, strange hums, sudden bursts of static that faded as quickly as they came, like signals bleeding through from some other dimension. For Daniel Cross, the desert was more than a place of mystery. It was an obsession. He had been a journalist once, a respected voice in investigative reporting, writing for magazines that prided themselves on exposing corruption and government secrets. But that was before his career derailed, before his editors decided he was chasing ghosts. Now he was a man on the fringe, dismissed by colleagues, ignored by mainstream media, and left only with the gnawing hunger to uncover the truth that had destroyed him. And that truth, Daniel was convinced, lay hidden behind the barbed wire fences and black security trucks of Area 51. The first time he saw it, well, as close as anyone could get, was in the spring of 1997. He had parked his dusty Chevy Blazer off Groom Lake Road, miles before the official warning signs. The gravel crunched beneath his boots as he walked to a ridge, a vantage point whispered about in UFO forums. The night sky was black silk, torn open by streaks of stars, brighter here than anywhere else in America. Daniel set up his tripod, raised his binoculars, and waited. Hours passed, the desert growing colder, the silence so complete that the snap of a coyote's paw on loose rock made him jump. He was about to pack up when it happened. A flash of light above the mountains, brilliant and silent, not like any aircraft he had ever seen. It darted upward, then sideways, then stopped in midair, hovering in a way that defied physics. Daniel's pulse raced as the light pulsed. Once, twice, then shot upward into the heavens, vanishing like a stone dropped into water. That moment became his curse. He had reported what he saw. He wrote articles, interviewed locals, pieced together testimonies from ex-workers who spoke of underground hangars and reverse-engineered spacecraft. But the more he published, the more ridicule he faced. His credibility dissolved, his bylines dried up, and his name became synonymous with fringe conspiracy. Yet through it all, Daniel never stopped believing. And now, standing again in the Nevada desert 2 decades later, the obsession still burned in him like a fever. Rachel, Nevada, was the nearest speck of civilization, if you could call it that. A handful of trailers, a few weather-beaten homes, and the infamous little Ale Inn, a diner and motel that had built its entire existence around UFO tourism. The place smelled of coffee, bacon grease, and the faint tang of beer spilled on linoleum. Tourists passed through, buying, we believe, T-shirts and alien keychains, laughing nervously as if mocking the very thing they secretly hoped to glimpse. Daniel slid into a corner booth, his back to the wall, a habit from years of being both a reporter and a man who knew he was being watched. "Coffee?" asked the waitress, a woman in her 60s with hair the color of steel wool. Her name tag read Marla. "Black," Daniel said. She poured without asking questions. He opened his notebook, the same leather-bound journal he'd carried for years, pages filled with scribbled coordinates, names, rumors, and theories. Tonight, though, he wasn't just jotting down ideas. Tonight, he was preparing. Marla leaned on the counter. "You're not the first guy to sit in that booth with a notebook and wild eyes. You planning to storm the gates like the YouTubers?" Daniel gave a thin smile. "Not stupid enough to get shot, but I'm planning to get closer than most." Her eyes softened with something between curiosity and pity. "They don't like people snooping. Folks disappear out here, mister. Just keep that in mind." Daniel nodded, though the warning only strengthened his resolve. Later that night, after most of the tourists had left, he met with a man who claimed to know the base better than anyone alive. They called him Eli, though no one knew if that was his real name. Rumors said he had worked at Groom Lake in the 1980s, back when the State Route 71 Blackbird was still the pride of American secrecy. His skin was leathery from the sun, his hands shaking slightly as he nursed a glass of whiskey. "You want the truth?" Eli said, his voice gravelly. "Truth will ruin you." Daniel leaned forward. "Try me." The old man's eyes flicked to the window, as if expecting someone to be listening. Then he lowered his voice. "They've got things out there that don't belong to this earth. Not just crafts, beings. They've been here longer than you've been alive, maybe longer than civilization itself. And our government's been trying to copy their technology for decades." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You've seen them." Eli's lips pressed tight. "Saw enough to lose sleep for 30 years. They'll tell you it's all Cold War prototypes, stealth bombers, drones before drones were a thing. And sure, some of it is, but not all. Some of it moves in ways no machine we've built can. And the bodies," he stopped. His hand trembled as he took another sip. "What bodies?" Daniel pushed, but Eli only shook his head. "I've said too much already." A silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Outside, the desert wind howled against the thin walls of the diner. Daniel wrote down every word. That night, in his motel room, Daniel couldn't sleep. He kept replaying Eli's words, thinking about the flash of light he had seen all those years ago. He remembered the ridicule, the headlines mocking him, the colleagues who stopped returning his calls. He had sacrificed everything chasing this story. And now, maybe he was closer than ever. He unfolded a crude map on the bed, a copy of one traded in UFO forums, showing possible underground entrances and rumored tunnel systems. If Eli was telling the truth, then somewhere inside that desert wasteland lay evidence that could change human history. His eyes settled on one spot circled in red, a dry lake bed, miles from the main gates. The perfect place to start. As dawn crept over the desert, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, Daniel packed his gear. A camera, night vision binoculars, a digital recorder, a satellite phone, and enough water to last 3 days. He zipped up his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and stared into the rising sun. He knew the risks. He knew people vanished out here, silenced, discredited, erased. But something deep inside him whispered that the truth was worth it, even if it destroyed him. Because Daniel Cross was no longer just a journalist. He was a man chasing the greatest secret of all time. Whispers of UFOs the road to the dry lake bed cut through the desert like a thread through a wound. By noon, heat ghosts were rising from the asphalt, the horizon rippling as if the world were dissolving. Daniel kept the Chevy steady, the map folded open on the passenger seat, the red circle glaring at him like a target. The radio fizzled with static and half-caught stations. Country ballads, a preacher warning about revelation, a tourist ad for Reno. Nothing stuck. Out here, sound slid off the earth like rain on glass. He pulled off near a fence line strung with signs. No trespassing. Use of deadly force authorized. A familiar warning to anyone who wandered too close to Groom Lake. The fence stretched into infinity, punctuated by cameras that looked like tiny, black eyes. He studied the nearest sign the way one studies a scar. Curious, repelled, oddly grateful for proof of old pain. Then he backed the truck into a stand of creosote bushes, killed the engine, and let the desert swallow the noise. He hiked the last mile with his pack cutting into his shoulders. Every few minutes he stopped, crouched, and scanned the flat with binoculars. Nothing moved. No dust plumes from patrol trucks. No small figures in sun-faded camo drifting along the ridgelines. Just the wind and a whisper of tiny feet, lizards darting over warm rock. Still, the feeling of being watched was a weight he could not shake. The dry lake bed revealed itself in stages, first as a white glare, then as a cracked mosaic stretching to the mountains, then as a mouth of the world, wide and thirsty. He stopped at the edge and ran a palm along the crust. The clay was warm and brittle, the cracks like the runic handwriting of the planet. He squinted toward the far side and saw what he'd hoped, the faint outline of tire tracks, baked into the floor like fossils. He followed them. At the center, the desert turned strange. The ground was peppered with circles of darker soil, almost black, each no more than a few feet across. He knelt to touch one. The soil here was fine and flour-soft, and when he lifted his fingers it clung like soot. He rubbed it between thumb and forefinger and felt a flicker of unease, the same unreasoning dread that comes when you step into a room and realize a chair has been moved an inch. The circles extended in no pattern he recognized, like the afterimage of a constellation. He took photographs, labeled them by GPS coordinates, and tried to feel like a scientist instead of a pilgrim. Then, just as he capped the lens, he heard it, a low, spreading hum, like a swarm of bees turned into electricity. It vibrated the air without setting the ground to trembling. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a tone that crawled up his spine and pressed a thumb into the soft meat at the base of his skull. Daniel lifted his binoculars and scanned the sky. It was a flawless blue, cloudless, indifferent. The hum rose an octave, paused, then dropped into a register he could feel more than hear. He fumbled with the video camera, thumbed it on, and pressed it to his eye. Nothing. Just empty sky and the shimmering line of mountains. The hum faded, then ceased altogether, leaving a silence more intimate than before, as though the desert were holding its breath. He waited 10 full minutes before he moved. When he finally stood, his legs wobbled the way they had the first time he walked again after a long night of sleep in the hospital chair outside his father's room. The memory flashed and passed. Antiseptic smell, an empty styrofoam cup, the red numbers on a heart monitor counting time. He shook it off and walked toward the far edge where the tire tracks ended near a spill of stones. That was when he saw the footprints. They weren't fresh. The wind had gnawed their edges down, softened them. Still, the shape was wrong. Not boots. Bare, maybe, yet narrower than human, the toes long and tapered like the petals of a strange flower. He followed them into the stones until they simply stopped, as if whoever or whatever had made them had stepped into the air and kept going. The old fear found him again, that crouching thing behind the ribs. He fought it with ritual. He photographed, he measured, he marked a waypoint. He told himself that there were other explanations for wrong-shaped footprints, erosion, a trick of light, the wake of some animal whose gait he didn't know. He did what he always did when reality bent. He wrote it down, pinned it in sentences, made it behave. By the time he returned to the truck, the sun had begun its slow descent. He decided to sleep in the cab and stake out the lake bed at night. He ate jerky that tasted like salt and old leather, chased it with water, and thought about Eli's face, the way the old man had paused on the bodies as if the two words themselves were classified. Daniel tried to picture them. What a mind raised on apes and angels conjures when told of something neither, and failed. The human imagination, he thought, was a genius at doors but a coward at rooms. He dozed with the seat cranked back and woke to darkness, so complete it felt like a weight laid across his chest. He checked his watch, 10:14 p.m., and stepped into the night with the camera harnessed, the night vision binoculars around his neck, the audio recorder pinned to his shirt. The wind had stilled. The stars were savage. Lights first. A single white bead chipped off from the horizon and began a slow climb. It moved with arrogant calm, accelerating without ramping, stopping without glide. He lifted the binoculars and saw not a plane, but a point, featureless, cold. It slid left, then dropped in a perfect, huge arc, as if gravity had decided to play a joke. Two more lights flared, dimmed, and took formation around the first like attendants. The hum arrived a heartbeat later, too late to belong to them, like sound mailed from another address. He forgot to breathe. He filmed. He whispered the timestamp into the recorder and cursed softly when his voice came out too loud in the quiet. The lights converged into a triangle, then into a single point, then stuttered across the sky in a series of impossibly quick, right-angle moves. A child playing with a cursor, he thought, giddy and terrified. Then, without ceremony, they were gone. The hum unwound into silence. He stood for a long time waiting for the normal world to extrude around him again. The grounded reassurance of truck metal, the smell of warm dust, the ordinary sounds of small lives living. Finally, he climbed back into the cab, placed the camera gingerly on the passenger seat as if it were a sleeping thing, and let out a laugh that was half sob. Proof? Evidence? No. The words felt thin. What he had was a record of something that refused to be translated into the language of policy memos and peer review. He watched the footage twice on the small screen, saw exactly what he had seen, light behaving with intent. But intent was not a thing you could publish without being chewed alive. Intent was where physics ended and religion began. At dawn, he drove back to Rachel with a singular sharpness in his veins. If the story were just lights and a hum, it would join the thousands of others buried in message boards and late-night AM radio. He needed witnesses. He needed voices with faces. He needed, if not bodies, then scars. Marla took one look at him and poured the coffee without asking. You got that look people have when they come back from a miracle. Miracle or mistake, he said, then corrected himself. Do you know anyone who worked out there? Someone who isn't going to give me a campfire story. Depends what you mean by worked, she said. Everybody here has done something for the base, even if they pretend they haven't. A cousin driving diesel. A neighbor doing HVAC. A quiet lady who launders uniforms. The money finds its way, even if the truth doesn't. I need someone who saw something, he said. And not just a test aircraft. Not a stealth prototype. Something that changed the shape of their head when they tried to sleep. Marla studied him for a long beat, then wiped her hands on her apron as if drying them of responsibility. There's a man named Victor. Lives in a double wide out past the alfalfa field. Worked janitorial. Nights. That was years ago. He doesn't like to talk, but he owes me. I'll call him. Victor's place sat alone against a low ridge, a square of bleached plastic under a wide and pitiless sky. A rust-orange dog lay beneath the trailer steps and thumped its tail without conviction as Daniel approached. Victor opened the door after Marla's knock and blinked at them both from behind thick glasses. He had the skin of someone who had once been heavy and then was not, his flesh a little uncertain about where to hang. In his living room, a fan cut the hot air into ribbons. A single framed photograph sat on the TV. A boy in a Little League uniform, mid-throw, mouth open in a yell of joy. Victor followed Daniel's gaze and nodded toward it. He's in Phoenix now. Calls once a month. He doesn't ask about the old job, and I don't tell him. I appreciate your time, Daniel said and meant it. I know this is hard. Victor shrugged. Hard is relative. Hard was the year my wife left and took the boy. Talking is just air. He folded onto the couch, put his elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor. Nights, like Marla said. Trash runs, floor polishing, supply closets. You'd be surprised how much the government throws away. Even secrets end up in bins if you wait long enough. What did you see? Daniel asked, keeping his voice soft. Sometimes, Victor said, we had big, long things covered in tarps. They told us not to look, which was easy. Fear was a kind of blindfold. But the tarps had a smell. You ever smell biology labs? Like that. Sweet and wrong. Bodies? Daniel asked before he could stop himself. Victor's jaw worked. Once a crash south of Papoose, they said it was a drone test gone bad. They trucked the pieces in. I was on the chutes by Hangar 6. They needed hands. We wore masks and worked in pairs. I carried a segment that wasn't metal and wasn't fabric. It bent when I lifted it, then snapped back, like a jellyfish that remembered how to be a wing. He looked up, eyes wet in a way that surprised him, maybe even embarrassed him. I went home and tried to explain to my wife and said, imagine a bird that doesn't have bones and it's still a bird. She laughed. The next year, she left with an electrician. Daniel took out his recorder and placed it on the coffee table. "May I?" Victor nodded, and Daniel pressed the red button. The little light glowed like a watchful insect. "Anything else?" Daniel said. "People? Creatures?" Victor's silence stretched so long Daniel thought he would leave the question unanswered. Then the man spoke so quietly the fan almost carried it away. "We had a sub-level under medical. You badged twice, and there's a hallway they keep colder than winter. We were told the chill keeps the air clean. It keeps your mind clean, too. You think less down there." I wheeled a cart past an open door and saw a shape under glass. That's all I'll call it. A shape. It was small, maybe 4 feet long, thin as a boy who hasn't had dinner all summer. The skull was not a skull, more like a bubble had dried in a bone. "You understand?" He swallowed. The text standing there had stickers on his clipboard, a NASA worm logo next to a flag. He looked at me, and his eyes told me I hadn't seen anything at all. Daniel felt a trembling in his own knees now, a relief and terror so intimately braided he couldn't separate them. Confirmation was a narcotic, and like all narcotics, it made big promises in a whisper. "What do you think it was?" he asked. Victor shrugged again, the gesture of a man who had made a home in the land between answers. "Maybe it was a special effects dummy. Maybe it was a kid's Halloween prop before the air dried it. Maybe they do that, leave a decoy for the janitors. Maybe that's part of the fence, a fence made out of suggestions." He looked at Daniel, and for the first time there was a smile in the corner of his mouth, ruined and sincere. "But I had a dream that night that smelled like that cold. And in the dream the shape opened its eyes, and they weren't eyes, they were windows. I looked in, and there was the desert, and the desert was me." Daniel clicked off the recorder. The dog thumped its tail again, unbearably alive. He thanked Victor, promised anonymity, promised, though the promise hurt to make, to share whatever he found so that the story belonged to more than just him. Outside, the sun shoved down on the world. Heat made everything a rumor. On the drive back, the outline of a narrative began to coalesce, not a neat thread but a net. Lights that moved like decisions, footprints that stopped in stone, a crash that left behind a wing without bones, a small shape under glass. Government science braided with myth, test pilots sharing air with priests. He knew how the magazine editors would react. Too soft, too wild, too literary to be hard reporting, too matter-of-fact to be fiction. He'd be told to pick a lane. He'd be told readers didn't like to be left standing in doorways. Yet another voice rose in him, the one he trusted most in the last lean years. Tell it true and let the truth bruise. If the story refused to be a single thing good. The subject had always broken boxes for a living. Back at the little ale inn, Marla refilled his coffee and asked nothing, which was its own kind of kindness. A pair of tourists in matching alien head baseball caps argued at the counter about whether the government could legally hide evidence of extraterrestrial contact. A trucker in a John Deere hat watched them with the calm of a man who understood that legality was sometimes only a story you told yourself to sleep. Daniel opened his notebook and began to write. Not an article, not yet, but a letter to whoever would one day read. He wrote about the hum and the lights and the footprints and the cold hallway and the wing that moved like memory. He wrote about Eli and Victor, and he wrote about Marla in her battlefield diner, and he wrote a sentence he would later cut and then put back and then cut again. If we're not alone, then loneliness is a choice we made because it made our engines run hotter. As the afternoon burned down, a man slid into the booth across from him without asking. He was in his 40s, hair clipped close, the tan of someone who lived outside the walls of offices. He laid a quarter on the table and spun it. The coin whirred and danced, a little galaxy on cheap laminate. Daniel Cross, the man said, as if testing how the name felt in the air. You've been busy. Daniel waited. The man stopped the quarter with a fingertip. You should stop visiting the lake bed. You should stop talking to janitors. You should stop writing those notes. People disappear out here. Daniel held the man's gaze. I know that line, he said. It's on the signs. The man smiled in a way that had no warmth in it at all. We don't need signs for people who listen. He stood, tucked the quarter back into his pocket, and was halfway to the door before he turned. Just because you've chased it this long doesn't mean you're owed an ending. When he was gone, Daniel realized his hands were shaking. Marla appeared with a dish towel, folded it, and slid it toward him like a napkin in a nice restaurant. He pressed his palms to it until the tremor dulled. They usually send the polite ones first, she said softly. That was polite. It worked, he said, and heard the thinness of his voice. For a minute, she studied him, then said, "You gonna keep going?" He looked at his notebook, at the coil of words he had made, because words were the only tools he'd ever trusted. He thought of the hum and the lights and the wing and the hallway and the shape that might have had windows instead of eyes. He thought of a man who loved a boy in a Little League photo and a woman who kept pouring coffee in a town that exists because a myth needed somewhere to sit down. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to keep going." That night, the wind came back. It lifted the sand and stroked the buildings and sang in the phone lines like a bowed instrument. Out beyond the fence, in the dark where the maps wore thin, something rose and traveled a long, beautiful, impossible line across the sky. Dana did not see it. He sat in his motel and made a list of everything he didn't know, then wrote a single word at the bottom and circled it. Why? If craft existed, why visit us? If beings existed, why hide? If the government knew, why deny? If none of it were real, why so many signs, so many cameras, so many warnings shaped like kindness for people who didn't listen? He closed the notebook and slept like a man waiting for a verdict. In the small hours, he dreamed of an open door at the end of a cold hallway and the smell of winter and summer. He walked through and found himself standing on the dry lake bed under a sky with no stars. The darkness above was not empty. It was full in the way a closed eye is full. He lifted his hands, and something answered, not with words but with permission. He woke at dawn with a single bright thought in his mind, so clean it felt like it had been delivered. Stop looking for ships. Start looking for messages. He packed the camera and the recorder, but he also tucked into his pocket a notebook the size of a deck of cards. On the first page, he wrote a new heading, Patterns. Beneath it, he listed everything that had repeated. The circles of soot, the triple light formation, the way the hum arrived after the movement, the way the warnings came wrapped in courtesy, the geography of rumors, Hangar 6, Papoose, the sublevel under medical. Then he left a blank page and drew a triangle on it with a dot at each corner. He stared at it for a long time until the blank space inside the shape felt like a kind of map. When he stepped outside, the desert was already heating up, readying itself to become a lie of water dancing in the distance. He locked the door, slid the key into his pocket, and felt the corner of the little notebook press against his leg. He smiled. He was still a man with too few answers and too many questions, but he had a new lever. Tonight, he would go not to the lake bed, but to the ridge where the cameras could not see both the sky and the ground at once. He would bring a radio scanner. He would listen. Truth, he reminded himself as he got into the truck, is rarely a single word you discover. It's a chord you learn to hear. He turned the key. The engine caught. Somewhere in the rafters of the sky, a note he could not hear yet began to vibrate, waiting for someone below to find the frequency and sing back. Encounters the desert, Daniel thought, had a memory. It held on to what it saw, the lights, the echoes, the whispers, and replayed them to anyone willing to listen long enough. He wasn't sure if that was science or superstition, but after weeks in Nevada, chasing fragments of stories and staring at skies that refused to behave, he had come to believe the land itself was a witness. Encounters. That was the word the community used. Not sightings, not rumors, but encounters. As if human beings were no longer the main characters, but guests in a conversation they didn't control. The eyewitnesses, the first was a rancher named Bill Harkins, who lived 40 miles from the base. His spread was small, just cattle, a few stubborn goats, and a windmill that creaked in the night. Bill was the kind of man who spoke with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as if waiting to be accused of lying. It was 92, Bill told him, standing on his porch while the desert sun bled into the horizon. Cows spooked so bad, I thought a mountain lion had got in the pen. But when I checked, they weren't looking down. They were looking up. What did you see? Daniel asked. Triangle. Black as tar, big as a football field. Blocked out the stars. Moved so slow it looked like it was swimming. Didn't make a sound, not even wind. Just drifted right over us, then gone, straight toward Groom Lake. Daniel jotted notes, heart pounding. And afterward, Bill chewed on the inside of his cheek. A couple days later, two fellas in suits came by. Black car, no plates. Said they were with the Air Force, but they didn't act like military. Told me it was a new stealth project and I should forget what I saw. Then one of them leaned close and said, "Don't talk to reporters." His eyes flicked up to meet Daniel's. "So what the hell does that make you?" Daniel gave a tight smile. "Someone who listens." Bill didn't smile back. "Then do me a favor. Write it down, but don't use my name." The second encounter came from a woman named Teresa Alvarez, a schoolteacher from Alamo who had been driving home late after a parent-teacher meeting. She agreed to meet Daniel in a roadside diner, hands trembling as she stirred sugar into her coffee. "I thought it was a helicopter at first," she said. Red lights circling above the highway. Then it stopped. Just stopped. Hovered right over my car. My radio cut out, headlights dimmed, everything died. I was so scared I couldn't breathe. What'd it look like? Not like anything I've seen. Not a helicopter. Not a plane. Smooth. Round edges. And the light, bright but soft, like it was coming from inside the thing, not shining out. Then, after maybe 20 seconds, it shot off so fast I thought I imagined it. Car started right back up. Daniel leaned forward. "Did anyone else see it?" Teresa hesitated. Next morning, two of my students told me they saw strange lights the same night. But they laughed it off, said it was satellites or something. I didn't laugh. I still get nightmares. Sometimes I dream I'm floating, and I can't tell if I'm awake or not. The enthusiasts, not all encounters came from fear. Some came from devotion. On weekends, UFO hunters set up camp along the extraterrestrial highway. Lawn chairs facing the sky, cameras pointed up, beer coolers ready. They treated it like fishing, hours of waiting punctuated by rare, glorious catches. Daniel joined them one Saturday, sitting by a fire with a group who called themselves the Watchers. A bearded man named Clyde swore he had seen orbs dancing above the mountains more times than I can count. A young couple from Oregon showed Daniel a series of blurry photographs they insisted were proof of non-human craft. A retired physicist, Dr. Monroe, spoke in careful tones about energy signatures and propulsion methods that could not belong to anything built by Lockheed or Boeing. "It's either alien," Monroe said, "or it's human tech 50 years ahead of what we're told. And if it's human, the question is, who really controls it?" The fire crackled. A chill settled over the group, not from the desert cold, but from the implication. Secrets that, deep, Daniel thought, could devour nations. The abductees, what unsettled Daniel most were the abductees. The men and women who swore the encounters didn't end with lights in the sky, but with missing time. He interviewed a mechanic named Jordan Pike in Las Vegas, who claimed to have lost 3 hours one night after pulling over on a deserted road. "One second I'm sitting in the truck, staring at these lights," Jordan said, voice low, eyes unfocused. "Next second it's morning. My coffee was still hot, but 3 hours were gone. Just gone." "Did anything happen to you physically?" Daniel asked. Jordan rolled up his sleeve. A small scar marked the inside of his forearm, perfectly round, no bigger than a pencil eraser. "Doctor said it looked like a burn. I don't remember being burned." He paused, voice breaking. "Sometimes I dream about a table, bright lights, voices I don't understand, hands on me that aren't hands." Daniel's pen hovered over his notebook. He wanted to dismiss it as delusion, but the tremor in Jordan's voice was too raw. This wasn't performance. It was confession. That night, Alone in his motel, Daniel spread the testimonies across his bed. Triangles in the sky, cars stalling, lights that hovered, people vanishing into silence. Stories piled on stories, different voices singing the same unsettling chorus. It was more than coincidence. It was a pattern. And somewhere inside that pattern, he thought, lay the truth he had chased for half his life. Theories of alien contact. Daniel Cross had always lived at the crossroads of facts and faith. Facts kept him disciplined, anchored to notebooks, audio recorders, photographs. Faith whispered in the spaces between. There's more than you're allowed to know. Now, with testimony sprawled across his motel bed, he found himself asking a question that no reporter ever liked to face. What if every witness is telling the truth, and I'm still too small to understand it? He drove into Las Vegas to meet Dr. Elena Vasquez, a theoretical physicist turned reluctant public intellectual. She had once held tenure at Caltech, before her speculations about faster-than-light travel and non-terrestrial propulsion branded her a dreamer among peers. Now she lectured at community colleges, her brilliance dulled not by time, but by exile. She welcomed Daniel into her cluttered apartment, where stacks of journals and chalkboards filled the space. "You want my theories," she said, not unkindly. "I want to know what's possible," Daniel replied. Dr. Vasquez paced as she spoke. "If the craft people describe are real, they're not using combustion. They're not even using jet propulsion. They're manipulating space-time itself, warping gravity. Imagine space as a sheet of rubber. Most of us roll across it, but these things fold it and leap. To an observer, it looks like impossible acceleration. To them, it's just stepping sideways." Daniel scribbled furiously. "So, extraterrestrials?" Vasquez smiled thinly. "Could be. Or it could be us. Maybe we cracked it decades ago, buried it under black budgets. But if it is alien, then they've been here long enough to study us. The real question isn't how they fly, but why they watch." Daniel let the silence stretch before asking, "And what's your theory?" She finally stopped pacing. "Contact has already happened, not in handshakes or speeches. In observation. They watch. They measure, like scientists studying an ant farm." Her eyes hardened, and maybe, just maybe, they intervene. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Because we're dangerous. Because we're children playing with matches in a dry forest." Later that night, Daniel met with a very different kind of theorist, a man known online as Prophet Ezra, who ran a podcast weaving biblical prophecy with UFO lore. They met at a truck stop chapel, the neon cross buzzing overhead. "They're not aliens," Ezra insisted, his voice trembling with zeal. "They're angels or demons, depending on which book you read. The shapes, the lights, the missing time, it's all in Ezekiel, brother. Wheels within wheels, fire in the heavens. You think this is new? It's ancient. Humanity's been visited since the first stories we ever told." Daniel listened, not because he believed, but because belief itself was data. Faith carved the same canyon in people's minds that science did, the canyon where all lived. Ezra gripped his hand before he left. "Write what you want, but remember, when the sky splits open, it won't be for discovery. It'll be for judgment." Driving back through the desert, Daniel weighed the theories. Scientists said space-time. Believers said angels. Government skeptics said prototypes. Conspiracy circles whispered about time travelers. Future humans visiting their ancestors like tourists. But none of the explanations fit cleanly. The puzzle wasn't built for edges. And yet, in the quiet of his truck, he understood one thing clearly. Truth wasn't a single theory. It was a chorus. Every testimony, every fragment, every fear, they were all pieces of something vast, something still unfolding. Epilogue. The silence after the night, he decided to break into Area 51. The desert was colder than usual. The stars were sharp, too sharp, as if the sky itself had cracked. Daniel parked miles away, shouldered his pack, and walked toward the fence. The cameras watched. The wind carried whispers. his breath fogged in the moonlight. He reached the warning signs, the last threshold between myth and reality. He stood there for a long moment, notebook pressed to his chest. Beyond the fence lay answers. Maybe salvation, maybe damnation. Then the hum began, soft at first, then swelling, filling the air with invisible weight. He looked up. Lights emerged, three, forming a triangle above him. They pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat in the sky. The desert turned silver in their glow. Daniel's pen dropped from his hand. The world tilted. His vision swam. He felt himself rise, though his feet stayed rooted to the ground. For an instant, he wasn't afraid. For an instant, he understood. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And the silence of the universe is not emptiness, but restraint. And then, nothing. When tourists drove Groom Lake Road the next morning, they found Daniel's truck abandoned near the bushes, keys still in the ignition. His notebook was gone. His cameras were gone. Only the dust carried traces of him. Footprints that stopped abruptly, as if the man who made them had stepped into the sky and kept going. Some say he was taken. Some say the government silenced him. Others whisper he crossed into the truth he had chased all his life. At the Little Ale Inn, Marla keeps his picture taped behind the counter. He was stubborn, she tells curious visitors. But he listened. Most folks don't. And at night, when the desert wind howls and the stars burn too brightly, locals swear they hear the hum again. Not from the ground, from above.